Monday is to show you guys this. All right, I'm going to pass this around, but do you see these black spots on it? Mm-hmm. I put it in this little cup in case somebody was grossed out about wanting to touch a dirty or
rotten
decaying,
apple.
not rotten, but decaying apple. It's not completely rotten yet. There's some good, fruit on this side, but it is definitely in the state of decay. All right, now what we're looking at is the black part. Now the other thing is you guys have all seen a banana turn brown, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So for the first century church, yeah, she's been wanting to throw that out so often. All right, so I'm in Book of Revelation, chapter 6, in verse 5. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast. Do you want to throw it away? You can finally throw it away. And I heard a third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he sat on him, a pair of balances in his hand. Now, we translate this black horse, and we think of black as a color. The ancient world, the word that is used here, they would have thought of the black on that apple, or what was happening to a banana in its state of decay. All right? So now you can see that we're not just looking for a black horse, but it has something to do with rot and decay. All right? So now you guys can see, like, once we get into this book of Revelation, I'm hoping that you guys start to see things completely different. Okay? So we're not just looking for a color, but specifically that word to the ancient world, they would have known and understood it to be like a mold, or not a mold, but a decaying, like a decaying fruit. Going on in verse 8, and I looked and behold a pale horse. All right, now some translations will call it green. Now again, that's closer than pale, because pale is just way off. We think of, like lily white, but that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at a pale horse, but the color green is in some translations. And what it actually is, it's mold and rotting flesh, specifically mold on rotting flesh. All right, so, this is the horse of mold and rotting flesh. All right, so again, a little bit different from just the color green or just the word pale. All right, so that's debate you for when we do get, if we ever do get to the book of Revelation, Lord willing. Because I've been it's probably been about 2 years that I've been considering doing it. Okay, so just for you guys, that was a little side note, again, to get your mind thinking, more traditionally on some of these things, because a lot of things have gotten corrupted over the centuries. Like the big word pisteo, faith. It's not just believe, because the devil believes. It's deeper than that. It's more than just that. The word repent, it's not just repeated pain. It's a turning from and a turning to. So there's a lot of work, if you really think about it, to really understand the scriptures properly. There's a lot of Western mindset that we have to put behind us. Okay. Now, this being the prelude to this evening. Okay. Now, when we laid off, where we left off a few weeks back, we had just got into this very heated part, and I was like, we can't even start getting into that tonight. What you guys hopefully will see at the end of this evening, all right, and I've given you the tools as far as Bible Hub, to be able to go there and you can double check anything that I ever teach you guys. Okay, some of the things that you guys are going to hear tonight are so contrary to everything that we have been taught. It might be staggering at first, but I'm hoping that after the dust settles, you have a different view of this Romans chapter 1. All right, I hope. All right, so we'll do questions real quick. All right, this is our fun part, or fun-ish part, I guess. All right, this is really interesting that this question is in this game. I was very surprised. All right, what apocryphal book is quoted in the book of Jude? I know one other person that I know will know if nobody else has it.
I don't remember.
I'll let Alex answer.
Aren't there two?
Huh?
Aren't there two?
Apocryphal ones?
Not in the book of Jude. It's only like 4 chapters, 3 chapters.
Enoch?
Yes. Yeah, the book of Enoch. And I was really surprised that this was in there. Jude, it's only 1 chapter long. Jude, verse 14. Okay. What country destroyed Jerusalem and the rest of the southern kingdom in 586 BC?
He said it already.
He said Babylon.
Babylon, yes. Alright. Oh, here's a good one. What event took place immediately after Jesus gave up the Spirit?
The curtain, right?
Yeah.
Wow, he had all three right off the bat. Alright, so, it's kind of interesting. The temple rent, alright? This is a prelude to actually what I'll be teaching in the women's study in about 2 weeks, I think. Divorce was placed in the Old Testament, okay? But there's a very specific reading, or reason. If we look at Jeremiah chapter 3, God's talking about how he divorced one of the sisters, okay? And the other sister was doing all the same things as the one that was already put away had already, done. They were now repeating those things. Speaking of the northern and the southern kingdoms, all right? Now, what was the punishment for adultery?
Stone.
Stone,
Speaking
death. Okay? So, God had always viewed, even as far back as in Egypt, he had always had these houses separated, or these sisters separated. Okay? And they committed adultery against him with other gods. Right? So therefore, the punishment for that would have been
Death.
death. Alright? But God allowed for divorce in certain instances so that he could put away that wife without having to kill off Israel, because he knew that they were going to commit adultery against him. Alright? And when Christ finished the work on the cross, that ripping of the veil, which separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies where the ark was, alright, it was almost like God ripping the marriage contract and tearing it, because it was done and that old wife was officially put away, alright, because when Christ came, alright, before the cross, God could not kneel down and help, alright, because of the laws that were in place already. It took the death of that husband who was married to ancient Israel. Christ died on the cross, which then allowed ancient Israel, the two sisters, to be free from that marriage contract. That marriage contract was ripped and torn. They were now free to marry another in the resurrected Christ. Okay? And I know this might be really, really deep at first, but this was all part of this plan. There's some things in the Old Testament that we just wonder, why in the heck are they in there? Alright, and once you start to put more of the pieces together and start associating Old and New Testament together where they're supposed to be, you start to see that God had a plan. Okay? So Christ was that husbandman married to these old two sisters. He died on the cross, freeing them from the law, freeing them from that contract of marriage, so they didn't have to be put to death. And then now they were free to marry another in the resurrected Christ, where now this resurrected Christ could kneel down low to help up this fallen one. Okay? So, kind of deep stuff. But, very important nonetheless. Alright, so on to our stuff for this evening. Any questions so far, though? Anything from previous weeks or anything? Everybody's good? Alright, Book of Romans. I'm going to ask, I think we're on page 3, and we're going to backtrack a little bit. Nope, page 3. We'll start at 24 tonight.
That's alright.
Alright, let me see here.
Go over there, show her Mary.
Romans.
If she had.
Nope.
Oh, go ahead and go by the Oh, I hope the printer works for us.
I'll be alright.
Let
You
me
would
see.
not copy tonight.
Otherwise, you could follow along in the Bible.
Yeah.
It'll be fairly close. But let me see if this prints first.
It's NIV, so different translation.
Yeah, it is going to be a little different, unless you want a King James.
Let's take a look on my phone.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's see. I'm about to print. Lexmark.
You said we're starting at verse 24.
Oh my gosh, it's working! Yes! Man, normally I have to shut down the computer, shut off the machine, flatten out everything, erase all the memories, and then we can actually do this. Alright, don't lose that one. That's
No.
7 sheets.
I have it. It's at home.
Okay. Oh, we'll tell you what, we'll keep one here in case somebody else then. Yeah, so leave that one and then somebody else can use it in case somebody forgets it again another week. And if you need to take notes, there's tablets on the table for notes. Alright, so we'll tell you what, does anybody want to read 24 to the end of the chapter? It's about 10 verses.
I would be willing to do that.
Okay, let's read it so we have it in our mind and we start thinking about how we've been taught. And then, unfortunately, I'm going to blow up that bridge. Okay?
What is
Because,
it,
like,
Romans?
the translations,
Romans 1.
it's pretty different. And especially once you see all the evidences, hopefully it'll help you along.
Chapter.
Chapter 1, verse 24. Through the end of the chapter. Wherefore, God also gave them up to uncleanliness through the lust of their own hearts, and dishonored their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections for their women. For their women did change the natural use into that against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust towards one another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves their own recompense of their error which is met. Even as they did not like to retain in God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliceness, full of envy, for murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whispers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that which they commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in doing them.
Alright, so, we've always been taught, okay, now you may come from a strange tradition that doesn't teach this, but we've always been taught, and it was funny because, like, in one of my, probably about my 10th Bible study, we covered this a little bit, and somebody got really upset because I read these verses, alright, because the church world usually uses this as their
Anti-gay thing?
yeah, like, this is their, banner for the anti-gay movement, okay? Now, I'm not saying that that is right or wrong, but these verses don't really apply how church tradition has made them apply, okay? And we're going to see that as things go on tonight, okay? Because, there's often we see that God's word is used for very evil things, okay? And this is not God saying that if you are gay and homosexual, then all of these things is your condemnation. What it is that anyone, okay, any one of us could have something that we do where we ignore God to the point where he removes his protective hedge around us, and then allows us to be completely taken over by whatever that is that we are putting before him. Video games, jobs, money, anything. Okay? Any of those things could lead us to the exact same place as what we're going to see, a very bad place. Okay? So it's not just this homosexuality idea, and what's being talked about here, like, just wait until we get to these verses, because of the fact, like, I think you'll be very surprised on how things were translated. Okay, so, first off in 24, wherefore God also gave them up. Now it's interesting, that phrase, gave them up, is used 3 times. Alright, and that's very important, because that is a number that, that is, it's like definitive, okay? 3 times, there's no question about it, alright? Remember, if you come with someone and you have 2 witnesses with you, and you all say the same story, those 3 people, there was no question about your testimony, okay? So that's a very important thing. So this is being used 3 times. Wherefore God gave them up to uncleanliness, which is like a useless service to God. This whole little phrase, this whole thing, uncleanliness through the lust of their own hearts, this is kind of like, the drug addict who is basically left to his own devices. And if you guys have ever known anybody who has gone down that path, they go to a very low, dark place. Isolation from people, doing whatever it is they can to get the drugs that they want. Depending on how hardcore the drugs are, the level of what they'll do for it, is greater. So that's kind of like this protective hedge that gets removed, and God says, all right, you love this more than me, then it is all yours. And for us, it's kind of like that little kid who gets into the candy bowl, and like when mom's not home, all of a sudden, like, or like right after trick-or-treating, let's just say they have that bag of candy, if they're allowed to just take that candy and disappear with it, all of a sudden the next time you see that little kid, they usually come out with a stomach ache and they're feeling sick. Alright, that's the same thing. That's what happens with God. At some point, when you say no to him too much, you end up being so indulged into whatever your pleasure is that it will make you sick off of it. Okay. Alright, skipping down to verse 26. Alright, we see that again. For this cause, okay, the ones who changed the truth of God into a lie, who ignored God, who turned their backs on God and said, hey, I know what you want, but I'm going to do what I want, when I want, how I want to do it. For that cause, God gave them up, again, to vile affections. Okay. Now, have we gone detailed through this verse? Or is this where we kind of left off?
We left off on like 23.
Oh, we left off all the way up on 23?
Mhm.
Okay, I just got a page of notes, and like it's kind of hard for me to tell.
Yeah, we left off all the way on 23.
Oh, then we have a lot.
We kinda skimmed 24, but then you stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
I
I've
have
been
some notes on 24, but
Yeah, I've been making a note as to like kind of where it ends.
Okay. All right, let's see. All right, can somebody look up Jeremiah 17:9? I'm going to look up this other one here. Psalm 37. Yeah, I really thought that I was starting a little bit lower.
Sorry, sir. Jeremiah.
I've got 17:9. Wow, this is like our. Go ahead.
The heart is deceitful above all things, and this.
Say it louder, Troy.
Oh, that's what I'm gonna reread it. The heart is despiteful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it?
Okay, so we see here, wherefore God gave them up to this ungodliness through the lust of their own hearts. And one more time, read that. Thinking about that he gave them up to the lust of our own hearts. Like that could be any one of us.
Okay.
And the heart?
The heart is. I just said this already.
Deceitful.
Deceitful above anything, and desperately wicked. Who can know it?
Desperately wicked. All right, so now you can see that without God putting that protective hedge
17:9.
around the things that we want, if He releases us to have all the desires of our heart, you know, what a pitiful place we'll be. All right, the other verse that I got here is Psalm 37, verse 4. Okay, now this is the flip side of this coin. All right, one side, you are rejected, you are put away and left to your own devices. The flip side of that, Psalm 37, verse 4. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and He shall give thee the desires of your heart. Okay. Now, this is important because remember how I said the way back in the day in high school, I didn't want to come to God because of the fact that, like, oh, I got to give up having girlfriends, you know? That was my concern as a high schooler. And the things that I thought that were going to be the hardest to give up,
Or actually not.
yeah, I started to seek the kingdom first. And all of a sudden, my heart and my mind started to change, where the things that I thought were going to be big, troublesome things for me to give up, they started to fade further and further and further. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that I am sinless. It doesn't mean that I do not have, you know, lusts of things in this world. It just means that those things start to diminish, and then the things of God start to grow. All right? So it's that whole thing of that once you start faithing and God takes some part of Him and puts it in you, okay, that if you start to listen to that subtle voice of the Holy Spirit, that can grow larger and larger. I talked about this when I did the study on the self. It is on YouTube if you guys want to check that out. About God implanting this little, you know, this little like a walkie-talkie inside of you, where you can hear the subtle voice of the Holy Spirit, and if you start to follow that, you know, it slowly will take over all those desires from this world that are pushing against you, trying to pull you, because the devil will always have deceiving desires. Okay? God had set up this relationship between a man and a woman. The devil says, hey, you don't have to do it God's way. You can have all the pleasure in this world that you want. Okay? And that is one of those things where if you say, hey, okay, I don't want to do it God's way, well, then here we go. We are going to be turned over to those lusts and those desires to the point where they rule over us. So you have a choice of two slave masters. One being God, or two being the flesh, the world, and the devil.
What?
The cord is falling.
Oh, I was like, I was just pointing at me for.
I was wondering, like, what are you pointing at?
That's what I'm
It's
saying.
making
I thought
noise.
she's pointing at me.
Yeah, it's slowly falling, slowly. It actually wheels up. So,
No, that's not what you.
but anyway. All right, so the heart, can we trust it? Probably not. Okay. Now, if we are following and we are trusting and doing that faithing act towards God, all right, like I said, those desires, God is going to start planting new desires in your heart, and those other things will fall away. It does not mean that all of a sudden you're never going to look at a woman and go, but, all right, it's going to definitely help you in that journey. Okay? Okay, that whole thing, let's see here. Uncleanness is the lust of their own hearts, the desire. Let's see, anything in the Greek? No, everything else, this is a pretty good verse as far as the translation goes. All right, so just make note that he gave them up. It's repeated 3 times. And we'll go over that as we come to them. And I think we are good. Okay, so verse 25. This one here, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. That worshipped is just divine service. Okay, let's see if that's over in. It is. You see that there in the Greek. It actually does say offer divine service to the creation beside the one creating, being God. Okay. Verse 26. For this cause God gave them up. Here we go again. To vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. All right, does anybody want to be bold enough to say what they think that means? Even if it's just the tradition that you've been taught, it's okay. If not, I mean, I've kind of already said it, but...
Girls being with other girls?
Girls being with other girls, okay? So, you guys want to know something that's very interesting? In the ancient world, that was almost never done. Okay, that was not a big problem with the ancient world. There's one island in Greece where that was kind of prevalent. In fact, that's where we get the word lesbian Has anybody ever heard of the island of Lesbos? Okay, that's where it comes from. And it's interesting. Actually, to do this study, like, I've even had to study ancient Roman court cases, okay, where things went before, the Roman Senate, to clarify words that are being used in these scriptures to what did people think these words meant at the time. All right, so that's how extensively I've gone over these things. Like I said, words are vehicles. So if I'm going to show you that this word is a vehicle taking you somewhere, contrary to what it's been accepted by the majority of this world, I better have good evidence to back that up. Okay. So anyway, so this island of Lesbos, there was actually a very recent court hearing that was done because the widespread use of the word lesbian elsewhere in the world, in this island, if you were born on the island of Lesbos, guess what you were called? A lesbian.
Okay.
Okay? So because of the tourists that are coming, all right, lesbian tourists that are coming there, and this word being used so much, they were actually trying to put a giant kibosh on anybody with tourism using that reference because it actually, it means the person from that island. Okay? Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. All right, but going on. For this cause, he gave them up. All right? So, let's see. For this cause, Theos, besides, he gives over. All right, that giving them over, it means to deliver over. Okay? Now, it's a very interesting use of this word. Can you guys think of any time when someone was delivered in the scriptures? Like, there's 3 really good ones in the New Testament.
Wait, what was the question one more time?
Okay, somebody look up Mark 14, verse 10. Can you think of any times where someone was delivered over to someone? And
Jesus
another one,
was
Mark 15,
delivered.
verse 1. What?
Jesus was delivered over.
Yes. All right, so we'll look up these 2 cases. One is Judas to the Sanhedrin, Mark 14:10. The other one is Mark 15:1, and that's when the Sanhedrin brought him over to Pilate.
I have the Mark 15 one.
I have a Mark 10.
Who's got 14:10? Okay, go ahead and speak up.
And Judas,
Iscariot.
And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went unto the chief
I don't have the verse.
I have the King James verse. So it's, let me switch the IUV.
The NIV is, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them.
Right, and that betrayal,
Oh,
betray, that's the word that gets translated from this idea of giving over. Okay? And then Mark 15:1.
And straightway in the morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and carried him away and delivered him to Pilate.
All right, so there you see delivered. All right, and that's that whole idea of this giving over. All right, so you can see, like, where it's used, it's really not a nice situation when you are the one being given over. Okay, and that's one of the things that Paul's trying to get across here is that we don't want God to give us over to this world, the flesh, and the devil, because they will tear us apart. Okay. All right. Can anybody think of an Old Testament time where God gave someone over to their desire? And in fact,
a little. I mean, it's
a really
was
big
it sort of that way with Saul?
with Saul. Oh, King Saul.
Yeah, King Saul.
I would have to go back and double check. I was looking for somebody in Egypt. There was a big person in Egypt, a big story, where someone did something, someone did something, someone
Pharaoh, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So what did Pharaoh do? He hardened his heart. He hardened his heart. He hardened his heart, and then finally God said, "What? I hardened his heart." Okay. So again, if we find ourselves in a situation where we continually harden our heart against God and the things that He's saying, hey, you don't want to go down that road, and we keep going down that road, eventually He removes all the barricades, all the blockades, all the signs, and says, have at it. Okay. Let's see. Oh, here's another one. All right. Now, in the wilderness, do you remember when the people started to complain about not having meat?
Oh, they get quail and they get so much they feel sick afterwards.
Oh,
and it rots.
not just that. God says, you will eat quail, not for a day, not for 3 days, but an entire month you will eat until it comes out your nostrils. Okay, again, that is another case of where God gave them up to this want and desire of the flesh. So again, think of that as we sin and as we do things that we're not supposed to be doing. Things that we know that we have trouble in the spirit about. Alright? That one of these days we might be given up to whatever that is. And it's seemingly, like I said, I mean, it could be something little. You know, all these little vices that we have in our life that we put before God, anything that becomes an idol to us, that we put before God, can become the same vice that holds us. Okay? To the point where it will be coming out of our nostrils. And that had to have been painful. Because, like, every once in a while, I mean, have you ever, like, I can remember at some point, you know, like eating Chinese food and, like, getting kind of stuck in my nose.
Choker. Yeah,
You know what I mean?
choke
You have to,
or
like,
cough.
yeah. You know, when you're coughing and you choke and then all of a sudden you know it's not in the right place. Okay? Like, that's pretty painful. Even for one little tiny grain of rice. I can't even imagine with the sins, some of the sins of the flesh, you know, that we can get caught in, how painful it could be for others. Okay. So, do you guys see in the Greek the word pathe? All right. This is strong feelings and desires that are not guided by God. Okay. So for this, God gave into those emotions of unvalue or dishonor. All right. Those emotions are emotions of the heart, of the flesh, that want things of this world, the flesh and the devil, that are not guided by God. Okay. That pathe is that's it. That's the big gist of that word that's important. Okay, in the second line, karisen, second from the end. It starts with an X, but sounds like a K. You guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
That word, it just translates being use, right? Change the natural use into that which is against nature. That word is specifically used for sexual relations. However, not the ones that it's been translated into. That it exclusively talks about the word, when you break it down into its parts, it's employment of sex. So he's talking about prostitution. Okay? The natural use of the woman was that to what?
Wife.
Wife,
Be a mother.
bear children. Okay? Because that was the whole thing. God said, go out into the world and replenish the earth. Okay? So the natural use of a woman is that to have children. Okay? To continue Adam kind. Now what we find out is that at this time, you guys know about the Temple Aphrodite. We've talked about it a few times. You know, what was going on there? Prostitution. You know, travelers from other cities would come, pay a tribute to Diana, to Aphrodite. They would get to have sex with a prostitute. And the prostitute was then allowed to stay there and was cared for by whoever ran that, you know, house of prostitution or the oracle. So we see here that the women were given over to those things, all right, but to what? To the natural use of the woman, but given over to this life of prostitution. All right, so that's what Paul's talking about right here. All right, so it has nothing to do with women. In the ancient world, it's very, very scarce. There's about 3 bowls that have a picture of a woman with a woman. There's one small wall depiction of a woman with a woman in Pompeii. And other than that, you don't find it in any writings. There is one person from actually, I think, the island of Lesbos that was, you know, a writer of erotic poems. Okay, but that was about it. You know, it wasn't something that was really prevalent in the ancient world. Okay, now what was prevalent was bearded men, specifically, bearded men with young men or young boys, no beards. That was a huge problem in the ancient world. We have most of the Roman Caesars all had a young male prostitute. There was one that actually is written about that he fell so in love with this prostitute or this young boy that, you know, he wanted to somehow marry this young boy. All right, that was a huge thing. And it even, believe it or not, still happens today. I forget the town, but it's in Egypt, along the Nile, towards the southern end, towards Ethiopia. And what you have is that there is this custom. Women stay in the house. Okay, women never ever leave the house. The men are the ones that always go out to do all the grocery shopping and anything having to do with the world. The men are the ones that go out. If a man has a young boy, all right, the men will actually trade young boys, their sons, once they reach the age of 12, to another man solely for the purpose of sex. Okay, and it's completely accepted. The men who are doing it today, when they were 12, this happened to them. Completely accepted in this part of the world that that's an okay thing to do. All right, I could never fathom the idea of giving Noah to another man and getting his child in return just for sex. Okay, so we still have this same problem that was going on in ancient Greece, going on in ancient Rome, still going on today. If I can remember the document, there was a whole documentary done about that, and I can't think of it offhand. Otherwise, I would have showed you a little excerpt from it tonight, just to kind of reinforce that, you know, this is what we're talking about here soon. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
So you said the word Creason. Maybe I pronounced
Yes,
it
that's
wrong.
right. Kar-e-sin.
Creason.
Yep.
That you said that
It's only used when talking about sexual.
it's only used when talking about use in a sexual sense.
But specifically, it's employment. In fact, the other way that this word could be used is employment.
Okay, I guess the thing that's throwing me at the moment is that it's okay if we change the word use to the word employment, kind of reading through the Greek, so it's changing the natural employment, that word right there.
No. Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be read straight through like that.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about in the Greek, you know,
Okay.
what it would be is that the natural use of the woman, okay,
Right.
is an idea. And then we're going into here that what was exchanged, all right? Yeah, for a literal, I would have to do a little bit of work to do an actual literal translation of what this is saying.
Okay.
All right, but see, that's the big key is that, you know, with one word that gets changed, the whole sentence on how we translate it also gets changed. Okay? And that's why, you know, these words are very important to understand fully what they really mean. All right, so basically the idea is that God gave them up to these vile affections, and even the women, okay, even the women did change their natural use, which that was of, you know, childbearing, into that which is against nature. All right, just for the sole purpose of pleasure. Okay, that's kind of what it's trying to get across. But in the wording, you know, without the right words being understood, you know, that's what makes it a little harder. Okay, and even with the Greek, how the Greek, when you get into like genitive forms of the word, you know, you have to know a lot about where the, you know, what the noun is, what is the action, who's the action, because like we already know that in Greek, you know, there are action nouns, faith. Okay, we translated faith or belief, but in actuality it's an action noun. But in the English we have no way of doing an action noun. So it gets translated into something different. Okay? Alright, so the gist of this is that they were given over to this. Alright, this young girl, she wants to be in the sex industry. That's what she wants. I keep trying to pull her out. And then finally God releases her to that. And for the rest of her life, until she becomes old, you know, to the point where she can't do it anymore, you know, because men just find her undesirable, she's going to be given over to that and completely left to it. Okay? So that's what the gist of this verse is trying to get to. that God had this person, specifically a woman, specifically these women who were doing prostitution at that time, and they were going to be let go and given over to that, and God is going to wash his hands of that. Okay? He's not going to try to hedge around them to keep them from that, because that's what their hearts want. You know, rather than trusting and faithing that God could take care of them in some way, they chose that, here at the Oracle, I can have a job, I have a place to live, and I'll be fed. And unfortunately abused by men. You know. So, that's the gist of this.
So, typically in that time, any women that ended up in prostitution were there, I mean, at least kind of by choice. I guess I'm bringing this up in dealing with the issue today of
Prostitution
more
is what goes on.
the more
Yeah.
forced prostitution that happens sometimes, where you're going to
Kidnapped even.
kidnapped even,
Yeah. Yeah, and see, and back here, remember that there was
so
no middle.
there wouldn't have been as much of that back then, or would there have even been
It's
some
still,
of that?
yes, it still went on.
Yeah.
Now, when Paul talks about, treat your slave rightly, right, in his Philippian, or no, not Philippian, it's the short one, I can't think of it. Oh, wait, or is it, no. Oh, I forget now.
Philemon?
Philemon, yes, thank you. In there, he's telling this person to treat him well, because slaves were often used for sex.
Okay.
All right, males with beards, nice young boy is my slave. All right, that person was in your home. You were to care for them and take care of them, because remember, there was no middle class.
Right.
So you either owned or you
Right.
worked for someone. All right, in this case, for whatever reason, the women that ended up in the sex industry, they could have been divorced and put away, because at that time, you remember when the Pharisees came and said to Jesus, can we put away our wives for every and any cause? All right, they had a thing where if you found your wife undesirable because she was on her period and she was unclean, that you could get a bill of divorce for that. All right, so it was completely against women. All right, and God said, he came along and he tried to change things a little bit in that case, So you got to think of, like, when this is specifically the King James, all right, when they were translating this, if they have a mindset as they translate this and they think that it has to do with women on women action, then what are they going to do? They're going to form that sentence around to get that idea across. And that's why one word can unravel an entire sentence. And when you find something like this, where the word doesn't really fit in the context of even the sentence, then obviously there's something about this word that we have to look at. All right, and that's a huge clue when we find something like that. That's why I said this is going to be a very testing study.
Right.
This is going to be the hump, though. The rest of this, if you can get through this, once we get into the mentality of the gang mentality of the church world, I think you'll be able to be accepting of that. I mean, we talked about the hats and the earrings and things like that. So you'll be able to see that gang mentality. But this stuff, it's so been drilled into our head that this is God's accusation and condemnation of homosexuality. It's hard to pull us back out of that tradition. All right? But I'm trying to take us back so we can have a pure and clean understanding of what Paul was really talking about. Because it's very important for us to understand the rest of this letter. Now, even though this could be the condemnation for that act, this is not specifically saying, if you do this, then you are about to have all this happen to you. That's not the case. Okay. Matthew Henry, the commentary, the blue one laying around here somewhere, what it talked about this is that God removes the bridle of restraint and lets them to themselves. Okay, so he uses the idea of a bridle, something that keeps the horse in line. All right, us being the horse, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Okay, talked about Pharaoh. We talked about the food coming out their nose. I forget who said this, but willful hardness is punished with judicial hardness. Okay, that came from a commentary, and for some reason I didn't put the note next to it. So willful hardness on our part, all right, ends up in the boat of judicial hardness from God. And again, kind of that idea of tough love that we don't want to be in. And likewise, also the men. whoa, okay, so now what are we talking about? If we're having this now comment going back to what we just talked about. So it says, and likewise also the men, keep in mind what we just talked about in verse 26 about the women. Okay? And again, right next to the English verse, do you guys see that word again? Kar, CH is a hard K, karisin. Male prostitution was huge in the ancient world. All right? Like I said earlier, like male slaves were often, if they were young, they were often used also as a sex slave. In that case, the person who was in care for that person was definitely doing in the wrong because they looked at them as a property rather than the opportunity to take care of a person who was there to help you take care of your, your farm, your homestead, whatever it is that your business was. Paul never gave us the details of the nature of the judgment on what this is, okay? But it's often, if you think back to the things that we've talked about, it's very often it's a psychological and a physical change that God does to us, right? When we choose to go along with what we want, when we want, and how we want it. Okay, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, all right, burned in their lust one toward another. Now that word, you see where it says men with men, all right, it's just male with male, okay? So we get the idea that this is two homosexual men that, are in their 20s, just after college, whatever it is, and they're running around doing the gay thing, okay? It's men, it's not men with men, but it's actually male with male. Going back to this idea that, see, in the mindset of these people, when they read this, all right, when the Romans read this, it would have been very close in their minds of the Caesars who were taking little boys, all right, as their sex slave, all right? So that's what we're, talking about here. Also, like young men who like couldn't grow beards at this time, they would actually become male prostitutes for this very purpose. All right, because of the fact that the beard thing was huge back then. All of the artwork and all the depictions that you find in Greek culture, is always a bearded man with a younger. They were looking for that younger innocence. Okay, even most of the sculptures you see, having to do with this period, what do you find? They're younger, very athletic cut, young men with little to no hair at all, other than on the head. Okay.
So, is there? But is that where people get stuff from when they say, like, if you're gay, then you're not going to heaven or something like that because of that specific thing?
What?
Oh, are you talking about, like, the unforgivable sin?
That's what I probably think.
Okay.
Wait, I didn't hear what you said.
Like, people be saying, well, since you're gay, you're not going to heaven because you're gay.
It's not because...
Although people do say that.
Yeah,
People-
people does say
People
that.
think
do
that- People think that that's like an unforgivable sin.
Yeah, and they're like, well, you're gay, so you're going to hell.
Well, I mean, if you continue in it, there's...
So you talked about the words there, males and males.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and actually in the Greek, you see that's how they translated it.
So they're the same word.
Yeah. Just like women, this is where in the New Testament, the word for men, male, brother, all of those things, they're the same word. The word for wife, woman, sister, auntie, cousin, all those things,
But
same
actually,
word.
So
it's
they're-
the same root, but a different word.
Oh, you know what? I did not catch that. Good job, Mary. Yeah, it is definitely the same root.
But it is a different word.
Right, but the emphasis is probably, the reason why there's a difference is it's the action. Because we're talking about specifically, the one, all right, who says, hey, I want this lust, and they go after these younger men, all right, that very well could be why there's a difference in there, is that is giving us the note and the reference back to the one who's doing that action, okay?
So there's never any indication clarifying that one is older and one is younger in the Greek?
Tell you what, let's pull this up and let me see. Yeah, usually it's context that kind of lets us know if it's like a son or younger. But I will specifically check this out and see.
I guess we don't have to chase that a whole lot right now, but I guess that has me thinking how, if that's the case, how on earth do you get some other passages like, well, one that comes to mind is Titus 2, because that was one that Bernadette used for our life group lesson yesterday.
Alright.
That it had lines about older men and younger men and older women and younger women. Like how could they be so sure that that's even what it's saying?
Well, it could have used some kind of a note of saying older. We'd have to look at the verse specifically and see.
And I guess we don't have to spend the next 20 minutes chasing that, but I just sort of, if we don't know it, if it's not clear here, how do we know that it's clear in other places, I guess?
Right.
But that's...
This says that both of those words do mean male.
Oh, and you know what I just noticed here? Likewise, also the men, all right? And then you see that at the very beginning.
Right.
We have here now the men with the males. So that very well could be the translation. It's not actually men with men, but men with males. And that's probably the different article on that second use. Males with are seen.
And here it uses the same word.
And where? Up at the top? Yeah.
Oh, and see, there's so few. Actually, his use right there, there's one occurrence of it in this verse. So, yeah, that second usage of it. So, what was Paul talking about? More than likely, we see that the first one we have, also the men, and then we have that same word here again, the men in with males, more than likely. Because now this is very easy to find. You look up pedophilia. There's another word for. It's interesting. Like there was arguments about is it pedophilia if they are at a certain age, and then it becomes something else. And I can't think of what that word is. But these are all things that you can check out, and you can see how rampant it was in Greece. Widely accepted. It started around. We first started seeing writings of this idea of older men with the younger men or boys about 600 BC. Okay, and it was well ingrained by Paul's time that it was fully accepted in most cases. Romans, though, did have a problem with a child having relations with an older man. Like for the Romans, they did want, an older 16-ish is what they would usually look for. Thinking before that, that they just haven't, that there was something wrong with that. But where in Greece, it was, very young. And actually in the Middle Eastern cultures, I don't know if you guys know, but Muhammad, possibly, I think his wife was Aisha. He, was betrothed to marry a young girl and she was only 9, but didn't have sex with her until she was like 10 or 12. So, I mean, in the ancient world, this whole idea of, marrying very young, being with someone very young, a little more widely accepted. Paul was trying to get people away from that and saying, hey, if you are going to be a Christian, 1, you can't be a prostitute. 2, you really don't want to be having sex with little boys. This is something that culturally, yes, it's accepted, but within Christianity, it's something that's not right. And we can see that because he talks about in other, places about how the older men to train up the younger men. Mm-hmm. He was not talking about that. He was talking about training them up in the way they should go. Okay. All right. And the rest of this is pretty much translated fairly well, and receiving themselves that recompense for the error that was met. So in that case of that one Roman Caesar, he was so given over to this passion that, he was destroying his military and his, political career because of the fact that he wanted this young boy. You know, he was completely given over to that lust and that passion. Okay, and then in 28, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, and here it is that third time, God gave them up to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. And not convenient, if you guys want to cross that off and put improper. Okay, that's really what we're talking about, is an improper way. And this time we see that since they did not like to retain God in their heart, okay, or I'm sorry, in their knowledge. So now we're talking about knowledge here again. That he gave them up to a reprobate mind. And that word translated reprobate, adokomon, that is just like an untested, disqualified, but also, you know, you could say unqualified or a worthless mind. So he gave them over to a worthless mind to do the things that are improper. Everybody good so far? Okay, so again, this is anyone. What is sin in the New Testament? Harmatia.
Missing the mark.
Missing the mark. So no matter if you not even get anywhere close to the dartboard, or you hit just outside of the center red dot, you missed the mark. That's all it is. All right? Christianity today, and even in the past, we always like to put on these labels of this is worse than that. Roman Catholic Church that I grew up on, they had their list of sins, and the sins that you should never do.
Well,
You know.
some sins are stated to be worse than others.
There are 7 things that God
God
finds
hates.
detestable.
Yeah.
Hates. Right. But in
And
the
lying
New
are
Testament,
2 of
though, right, but in the New Testament, because that's an Old Testament verse, in the New Testament, God sums it all up. You're all outside of the camp, and none of you can get in. You all miss the mark. There's nothing in the flesh that you can do to try to get in. You all sin. You know, so God kind of levels the playing field and kind of takes it out. The church is what puts it back in. You know, yeah, there are some things that, yes, God definitely hates. He definitely hates divorce. I think it's Malachi 3:5. You know, he says, I, God, hate divorce. You know, so there are things that he specifically does say in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, when we're talking about Christ and kind of, you know, summing up everything and the prophets, you know, he says, love your neighbor as yourself and love God. You know, but those 2 things sums it all up in 2. You know, he's also the one that takes all the sin. You know, there's the people that walk around even to this day that say, oh, well, I have never committed one of the, you know, 10 commandments. And it's just, you know, well, Christ kind of changed the whole playing field on that. If you even think it, you've done it. And then if you do it, you've done it twice.
Right.
You know?
But still, like, I mean, but that's still, but then that could easily give someone leeway to say, well, just because, you know, that whole once saved, always saved, so I can do whatever I want now.
That did come from this, actually. Because of this, to fight against that,
Requires, I mean, there are certain things that, yeah, I mean, I can say, I sinned today, but, like, that doesn't mean, yeah, no sin is, well, I know, I think some are, I don't know.
right. But see, that's the mindset that we grew up in. You know, and when I actually finally broke from the Catholic Church, that was a hard thing for me to start seeing, is that all sin is equal.
Well, yeah, all sin are pretty much equal, but, I mean, but to some extent, I mean, I prefer to be around, I mean, my stuff is more on a moral compass, basically, like, I feel that, yeah, I can't stand being around a liar, so if someone lies all the time, I wouldn't want anything to do with them. But I personally feel like if I'm lying to someone, well, no, I won't say that. If I'm stealing, or a thief, like, a thief is worse than a liar to me. A murderer is worse than a liar to me. It's worse than a thief.
But to who? To
To
you.
God.
No, you
Well,
said
no,
to
no,
me.
well, yeah, but look
Because
at
God
what-
doesn't make any definition like that.
Look at the 7 deadly sins. Yeah, a liar is two out of the 7.
Who came up with the 7 deadly sins?
It's the 7 deadly sins is the title,
that's what
but
the
it's
Catholic
just
Church
7.
named it.
But it's just 7 sins that God
7
hates.
things that God abhors above all. It's an Old Testament reference here.
Right.
Who knows if being a liar? So
Is that a
you
Proverbs?
don't want to be. No,
Let's go on.
Yep, 6:16. Oh, there are 6 things. Oh, yeah, 7. Yep. There are 6 things, even 7 things.
The different numbers thing.
And you said Proverbs what?
Oh, he was his haughty eyes. 1:6 starts it.
1:6.
Yeah, I think it goes to 19. Let me click on context. Alright, there are 6 things that the Lord hates, yes, 7 that are abominations to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness to who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. You guys want to know something really interesting? These next couple verses right here of what God turns you over, and then the markings of that is that.
Huh.
You said Proverbs
Like,
1?
you're going to hear this all again from Paul. Proverbs 6:16.
through 19.
Was it through 19? Yeah, through 19. Alright, now the biggest thing with Christianity today in the church, alright, is we are taught that some things like, oh, you can tell a little white lie. Well, a lie is a lie to God, whether it's a little white lie or a big lie. Okay? What happens with us in the church is that and we'll talk about this in chapter 2 a bit, is that we say, well, I've never committed any of these sins, and look at this young man, he is doing this and this and this. I am so much of a better Christian than he is. Right? And Paul is trying to get us out of that, away from that, because that was going on with the Pharisees. Oh Lord, thank God that I am not like that one.
Mm-hmm.
And we very quickly run back to that. If we can, put sins on a checklist and say this one's worse than this one, well, I'm not doing that, and that person is doing that. In some way, like, it's going to make us better than that person. To God, it's all filthy rags.
I mean, yeah, but I think at the same time it says a lot about the type of character you would want to have too. You don't want to live a lifestyle that is just completely against whatever this book says. I mean, there's plenty of people that I know that, like, yeah, they profess this, but if in their own lives you don't see what they profess on Sunday. So I look at that and say, okay, well, God says he hates these certain things, so maybe I should try to do as much as I can not to be that way. I can't be concerned about how you guys are doing, what you guys are doing in your lives, because that'll drive me crazy. It's hard enough to mind my own business. But, like, at the end of the day, I think you should look at that and see for yourself, like, okay, maybe I should try to live the opposite of what this is saying, because that way I can get closer to where God wants me to be.
Okay. Well, see, the thing is, though, that, morality is set by your surroundings, and when you are the one doing the action of trying to not be evil, it sets us up for a place of pride. Okay?
Not really. That's on the individual. I mean, if I don't want to tell lies, I'm just not going to tell a lie.
And that's good, and that's a moral thing to do. But if you say that it is you the one that is doing it, you're setting yourself up for one of the worst sins,
But how are you setting yourself up? I mean, all I can be concerned about is how God views my life. I can't be concerned about how everybody else's life.
Right. But God says, put ye first the kingdom.
Right.
So not changing anything about you. And that's like one thing, like with Coffee House Bible Study, like I've never, ever, ever told someone who walked in the door, you got to change that before you start coming here. because I know that if they are around the Word, faith comes by hearing the Word of God, that the Word will convict the person to change their ways. I don't have to sit there and say, you've got to stop doing this and you've got to stop doing this. It's the Word that's going to convict them.
Right, but I think as individuals, you should want to sit here and not want to be this type of person. No, I mean,
But
I
if
don't
you
think,
want that, it's because God is putting that desire in your heart.
I think I don't want to be a liar, so I'm not going to go running around just being a yes man or just trying to agree with everything, or you know what I mean. I don't want to be a murderer, so I try. I mean, it's hard not to hate someone,
Yeah.
but I mean, but I try not. If I begin to hate somebody, I try to whatever. I won't say whatever, because there's some people I just whatever. But I mean, I try not to view that person that way. So sometimes I'll try to do something for that person, or you know what I mean. Like you should. I mean, I don't know. At least with certain things, I sit there and I see myself, and it's like, well, I can kind of be like that myself. So what can I do to stop doing that myself?
Right, but like with us in this fallen state, there's actually nothing that we can do.
Yeah, well, no, you choose your actions. So
Right,
you make the choice whether you go and do something. I mean, you can blame stuff on sin all you want, and that based on our nature. But at the end of the day, it's your choice to go and do that. So why
Right.
should you?
But if you want anything that lines up with God, it's not because you are a special, super moral person.
I get that.
It's because God put that in you.
I get that, but I think at the end of the day, God gives us a choice. It's like if I'm sitting here watching, if I have a computer, I can sit here and say, I'm gonna go look at porn. I'm not gonna go look at porn. That's my choice to sit down and say, hey, I'm gonna go to this website or not. There's no point. I mean, you can say, okay, me not wanting to do that is definitely me doing this because God doesn't want me to. So that's my I guess you could say like me growing. But at the same time, there's certain things where you make a choice. You make the choice of what you want to do. Like God is always going to be there to help you along the way. But at the end of the day, it's your choice. And when you make that choice, that's when you can get. I mean, that's when you can get help. It's like if I sit here and if I'm having an issue, if I'm having a struggle, and I pray for something, but I'm not even doing. It's like, let's say you're praying for help. You know, okay. Here's a good example. My grandma needs help in children's ministry. Well, I'm like, well, you're praying for it, but how many people are you actually asking? Because if you don't ask anybody, nobody's going to come. So you can sit there and say, well, God will just bring someone, but it also requires effort on yourself. Because yes, God is going to help you, but He also requires you to do something. He's not just going to be like, hey, I'm going to do all this work for you.
Yeah, I mean, there is some truth to that. I'm not quite sure what the hang-up is, like, with this. I mean, we agree that sin is sin.
Right.
Okay? And if we are trying in our lives, if we are making this effort to be better, it's not because we're super righteous, it's because God is helping us to put that hedge around us, keeping us moving in a direction that He wants rather than our hearts.
That's true. But, like, what my point is that there's also a personal choice with that as well.
Right.
That there's not, because the thing is that that a lot of people can just sit here and think, well, God is it's just going to be instantaneous. But it's not. It's all, at the end of the day, it's all on you.
Well, it's a process with God, though. It's not really all on you. I mean, because, like,
That's not, well, but you're looking at that too literal. When I say it's all on you, it's like, God isn't going to help you unless you want to be helped first.
but Paul didn't want to be helped. I mean,
That's an extreme example.
But I'm just saying, though, that, there are times where God will stack the deck against you. And then if you keep rejecting Him, and that's what this letter right here is talking about, is that at some point, you give yourself over to whatever it is that you are chasing rather than seeing God. So we can agree on all that?
Yeah.
Okay. It just sounded like you were in objection to something. I wasn't quite sure getting it. So, All right, so there we have in verse 28, the third time where God gave them over to a reprobate mind, an unqualified, a worthless mind to do those things which are improper. Okay, now verse 29. Being filled with all unrighteousness, okay? Now that thing that they, or the words they translate being filled, it means to fill beyond full, okay? So like, you know what happens when you fill up the bathtub all the way to the very tippy top and then go jump in?
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Filled to the point where you cannot fill it anymore, okay? So, being filled with that injustice, all right, which is, we've talked about that. It's, injustice, this mindset of being injustice. So, being filled with all injustice, all right, now we're talking about here, this is what happens to you. If you've kept going in the way that you want to go, when you want, how you want, ignoring God and the Holy Spirit's leading to get you to detour and stop in the sinful ways, whatever your sin happens to be, okay? Being filled with that, all right, do you see that word fornication in the English? All right, not in the earliest manuscripts, okay? It was added later. All right, but what we have here is do you see the word right after adike, all right, which is unjustness? Oh, DK. I almost forgot about that. I didn't tell you about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, that word, remember I talked about DK being the god of vengeance from Zeus? Mm-hmm. All right, when Paul and the shipwreck and they end up on the island, what happens to Paul?
He gets bit by a snake.
He gets bit by the snake, and if you could read in the Greek, because it's not so clear in the English, they say, aha, DK will not let him live. Speaking of the god DK. Okay, that's the other place that this is used. And I forgot to make a mention of that 2 weeks ago. So, pornea. Does that look like anything to you guys?
Oh, porn.
Porn. Yes, this is where we get the word porn from. This is the Greek word that we get porn from. Alright, and you know what it means?
Prostitution.
Well, yes, that's one of the uses of it. Okay? It can be one of the uses, but what the
Sexual
word...
impurity.
Nope. What the actual word means, depravity and malice. Okay? So being filled with this unrighteousness, this injustice, with depravity and malice, alright, now you have another word that's very close. This word that translates wickedness. Okay? It's actually being filled with all unrighteousness and depravity and malice, bringing toil, annoyances, peril, and a wicked nature. All right, that word, that next word there, ponera, it's bringing toil, annoyances, peril, and wicked nature. So if you finally get out of that protective hedge that God is putting around you in your heart, in your mind, in your desires, then He brings toil, annoyances, peril, and a wicked nature into your heart. You guys got all those? Okay. More having, that word for evil, it's an inward evil. Not necessarily expressed outwardly, but it's the inside of your heart that like a seed of evil gets planted. Now this is a very interesting topic here. Alright, so, you guys see the light above me? Okay. You guys can see my hand, and it's bright, right? Mm-hmm. And when I cover it, it's in the shadow, okay? Darkness is the absence of light, alright? And you guys know that cold is the absence of heat, okay? There is no such thing as cold, okay? It's an abstract idea.
Right.
It's just the absence of a source of energy that we call heat. Light, energy, absence thereof. Evil is in the absence of God. So you see that all these verses are talking about you keep going in your own way, God will remove Himself from you. Okay? And then what does this say here? Being filled with all unrighteousness, depravity, malice, bringing to toil, annoyances, peril, and a wicked nature. more having this inward evil, even if it doesn't show outwardly right at first. There's this seed that gets planted because of the fact of God removing himself from that heart, keeping you good. Okay. Fornication, not in the earlier scripts, like I had said. And going down now to the second line, mistuo. Okay. It is full of glad feelings when someone is misfortunate or pain. Okay? And they translated it full of envy. But the vehicle of this word is a word that is trying to get across the idea that this person, all right, is full of wonderful glad tidings in their heart when they see someone that falls to bad luck, let's just say. But it's the feelings, it's glad feelings when someone is in pain or misfortune. So they get joy from seeing other people in pain. Now some of these things might start ringing bells with people that you know, and you go like, wow, yeah, actually that kind of reminds me of somebody. Okay? Full of murder. Murder is fine. Or it's a murderous attitude. Not necessarily they murder, but in their heart they would love to murder this person and that person. They think about these things. Stop thinking about those things. All right.
It was a rough one.
Eridos, that word strife they translate, is actually ready to fight. Now again, there's a lot of people running around that are always ready for a fight. All right. So we see this giving over in these people's hearts. Now, if you guys remember, I think it's in 1 Timothy, in that day, these people will have all these consequences turning them over. Okay? If you guys ever read through that, you're going to see some of these things again. All right, the word that they translate fraud or deceit, all right, it's a festering emotion that brings on pain, but it's done to the person by the person. Okay? So it's a festering hurt, a pain, that's brought on from the person to themselves. Okay, that's what this word that they're trying to go, this word that they, deceit or fraud.
Which one? Oh, the dolu.
Yes, exactly. Okay, and they translated deceit or fraud, guile. It's a festering emotion that brings pain, but it's brought on by oneself. Okay, the word for depravity is someone who fosters and fondles and enjoys evil habits. So as God removes himself, suddenly all the things that we would call evil or unmoral, they start to play with them. Okay, the idea of fondle, they play with them. They're enjoying them. Okay. Whispers, all right, the word that they translate whispers, it's a secret slanderer. So like if we were all here and all of a sudden, I'm talking about so-and-so, telling you all this dirty dirt on them, and it's not true, okay? Right. That's what that's about. It's a secret slanderer. Because we're going to see in the very next one, the word backbiters, okay? That is also a word that's actually a slanderer, but it's a publicly, showing of slander, okay? Possibly even to the person's face. And so you see, there's always order with these things. It starts out being in secret. Now we go to the word that has it in the next verse here, in verse 30. Backbiters, which is a outward slanderer. So publicly, outwardly slandering someone, like standing up in church and saying, that person is whatever because they're doing this, even though it's not a true statement. Okay, slandering them publicly. We actually see some of that stuff, I think, with candidates sometimes. Because, these commercials, it's like, wow, really have to choose between, like, which person is not the worst one?
Yeah.
Rather than, like, putting their good foot forward. Okay. Back by haters of God, it actually is haters of what God wants. Okay? So it's not just haters of God, specifically. Because a lot of times, people still believe that there's a God, but they really hate what it is, or the idea that he is going to tell them what to do. Okay? So it's the idea of hating what God wants you to do. All right. Yeah, see, and like the words, it's so hard. Like the way they translate it, you know. I mean, you see the translation and like you see how the actual literal Greek is. They're very different, you know. And it almost makes me wonder, did they not really know what these words and they kind of didn't know what to do? You know, because really when the King James was translated, you know, at last I can't even remember now, but I want to say that there's at least 2,000 other manuscripts that we have to know what these words meant. When the King James was put together, the three complete Bibles, Sinaiticus, Americanus, and the Vaticanus, those three that you can actually find online translations of. I actually have a Tischendorf Bible here that has the New Testament, and it goes through, and every time one of these verses was added by the King James or added in future time, it makes a note that this is not in these other copies. All right, so you can actually trace down and find everything that was added or changed, and there are Bibles out there that are like that. Okay, so the next one here we have outragers, finding pleasure in hurting others. Okay, now, I know there was a couple kids when I was growing up that, boy, they just loved to put the hurt on somebody just for the sole fact of seeing somebody cry. And I guess it still goes on today. Yeah, so finding pleasure in hurting others. Over appearing proud, arrogant is another one that you can throw in there. All right. I'm guessing they're translating the word boasters. Yeah, probably boasters. Okay. Well, no, actually this one is probably boasting. Yeah, that one they seem to skip over, unless they just grouped it together, because the next one, ostentatious, all right, for the English there that they translate from the Greek, it's boasting to another person. Now this word is kind of complicated. That word specifically means boasting to another person who lacks the wisdom to know that you're not telling the truth. Okay? So like, me sitting here saying that, actually, when I go out to Arizona, I have this big, huge house and mansion, this, that, and the other thing. Somebody might go, I just don't see this guy living in a mansion out in Arizona. What's he doing here? Especially in the wintertime. Okay? Someone who lacks sense, though, would be like, oh, wow, really? You have a mansion out in Arizona? All right? So this word is specifically boasting to someone who I know specifically will believe my lie. Okay? So now that's another, part of this is that this person who is let go of by God seeks to find people who don't have the right discernment, that they can sit there and tell anything that they want
So
to.
basically, it's like me telling you that I have $1 million right now in my pocket, and you could believe it.
I don't think I would believe you for $1 million in your pocket.
But now
in your
somebody-
pocket. Now, if you told me you had it in the bank somewhere, I might believe you.
Or like if somebody...
I think I would notice the $1 million in your pocket.
But
Okay,
like
I'll
if
say
somebody...
$300 in my pocket then.
Okay.
But like if somebody brand new to the coffee house, doesn't know any of us, walks through the door right now, and you have a conversation with them and say that you're a millionaire, that person could
Right.
believe you.
Right.
All right,
believe you.
so it's you seeking out those people that you can tell things about yourself and boast to them about how good you are,
Right.
and how you don't commit any of these sins. All right, that's what Paul is trying to get this context in. That this is what he was trying to get across. Okay, and then you have here inventors. That's perfect translation in the Greek to the English on the other and in the King James. Inventors, okay, of evils, all right, and that word of evils is actually a malice flowing from an immoral character, okay. So it's malice flowing out of, so inventing this malice flowing out of a person who has a rotten moral character. And now these last two words, they completely got wrong. Other translations, they might get it right, and it just says disobedient to parents, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like one of the commandments.
In the actual, what?
No, I'm saying that some of the Bible says respect your parents, your days will be cut short and all, actually.
Yeah, if you disobey. Yeah. Or no, actually, I think it's the reverse. If you obey your parents.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
people like to say you're gonna be cut short, but there's
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but,
Yeah, it's the opposite. Your days will be lengthened or elongated if you obey.
your parents.
Yeah. All right. So these last two words here that you see translated to parents, that word there, gone, is the root word for a parent. All right, and that usin, they add that, it's parents. Okay, so we're talking about plural form here. So to the parents. All right. Now the interesting thing about the unpersuadable or stubborn that they get, disobedient. That word specifically was a word in reference to God. All right. So you don't only are disobedient to parents, but that
Disobedient to
word
God.
implies that you are also disobedient to God and your parents. All right. The literal word translation would be unable to be persuaded by God and your parents. All right. So you are completely let go of. God cannot persuade you. He has tried to persuade you, and you are set on following your evil ways. Your parents are there saying, no, you cannot go down this road. Stop doing drugs. Come back home. We'll help you out. And that person says, no, I want this more. Okay?
That's why I want this lifestyle.
What?
Like they want that lifestyle to live, man.
I really can't hear you.
Like they want the lifestyle to look. Like, say for instance, if somebody's doing drugs and they try to get help, and they say, no, I don't want any help. Like that's the lifestyle they want, is doing drugs instead of getting help.
Right. That's their idol to them right at that time. So you can see that in the English translation, we totally missed the emphasis on, the God part of that. That not only to the parents, but to God also. Okay. All right. Without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful. All right. So starting from the beginning, the unintelligent or without understanding just means unwise or undiscerning. Okay. We're still on that page. Verse 31. So it says, without understanding, it's talking about a unwise or an undiscerning person. Okay. Covenant breakers is an unworthy, untrustable person. All right, somebody to say, hey, okay, you're gonna help me out, be here at 6, and you call them at 6:30 and like, hey, where you at? Oh, I just didn't want to come. Okay. A breaker of a covenant, somebody who breaks promises. Okay. Unnatural affectionate without unnatural affection. Unloving, devoid of affection. Okay. So without natural affection, it's kind of an unloving person. And then the last two words, that's pretty much just what they are. There was no problem with them. Straightforward.
So, no, wait.
Yes.
What does implacable mean?
Let's just Google that up.
I mean, the other word given here was unlibationers. Like, what?
Unforgiving, unappeasable, unsparing,
Oh.
relentless. So there's some good words that we
Okay.
can use instead. And then unmerciful, I mean, we know what mercy is, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of see the correlation between the two of those. One is a very unforgiving person, and another person that doesn't show mercy. We got that one story of the man who was forgiven like 1,000 talents or whatever it was, and he goes and he grabs a hold of the neck of the person that owed him 10, threw him in jail. That was a person that was very unmerciful. Okay. Who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. The only thing we can see is that third word in the Greek, that dikomai, or dikaioma. Right there, it's a sentence of condemnation. So, knowing the people who knowingly know what the sentence of this condemnation is. For the wages of sin is death. They still knowingly choose the world, the flesh, and the devil over doing what is right. And that word epigontes, unknowing, recognizing, it's actually knowing exactly. Okay? So it's a little bit more than just the idea of they know exactly what that sentence is. And the rest is pretty good. There's nothing that really was in the Greek that, stood out as, any kind of an error. That part they had it right. But you can see some words that change, like malice. We barely ever use malice now. So for the King James, they tried to find a word that they were trying to figure out what it meant. They did do their best. And I think out of all the translations that, the King James with its errors, it's the most correctable, because I feel that, and not just me. There are other scholars too that use the King James because of the fact that it's very correctable, the errors that were made, and it does seem that it was done in more of an innocence, in a not knowing, And like I said earlier, even in this study, that, they came to a word and they're like, what does this mean? They try to read the context and figure it out. In some cases, they just had no clue because they didn't have all the documents that we have this day. So like new translations that come out today that still fall in line with tradition and keep the errors that started here in the King James, I gotta say that it's probably not going to be too good for that, for those people who are behind that, because they had an opportunity to change and correct what was wronged over the centuries to what God really said. Okay, to remove the tradition, but unfortunately, you see after version after version after version, they very rarely break with what started with King James. The NIV came in some aspects they did, I think, to kind of show forth like, hey, we're a really good translation. Look at all these things we corrected, but there were big things that they totally missed. There were things that they omitted. There were things that were changed.
Yeah, there's a bunch of verses that the NIV just completely took out.
Yeah, when I actually first took the class on how we got our Bible, oh my goodness, it tried my faith. It really did. To see everything that the Bible was dragged through, all the people in their hands that they had in. Because, I grew up, with the Reformed tradition that I had during the high school years, I thought that thus says the Word of God, that book was solid gold in the way that it was preserved and translated into the English, that it was the exact thing that God said. And it was so hard when I took this literal Bible reading class to find out what the truth was behind all these things and seeing all the changes that were made, all the people. And just because of a group of people that said, hey, we don't want this in the Bible. Okay, well, you're the one buying the Bibles, we'll take it out. Okay, and that's a true story with what happened with a huge portion of scriptures. All right. I told you guys this.
Just as a reminder, going back to the first part of verse 32 again. So it says, "Who knowing the judgment of God."
Mm-hmm.
So is that again getting back to what we talked about last week, where the judgment of God is even written in the stars? Is that what that's connecting back to?
That is part of it, because like in the star story, if we do that story, if you guys want to do that story, I mean, I would love to. If we do, you'll see that throughout that, you see that the way of us, mankind, the way that we go, it's in the wrong. And it takes someone else to come in to do that saving work. I mean, it's all written there, And when you get into a fully detailed story like we did 2 years ago, I mean, we got so detailed that in every constellation, we went to the ancient names of these stars, studying the ancient names and what they meant. And honestly, that was the most eye-opening thing, because we have this word, this name that has not changed for centuries, for millennia, and yet it still means the same thing that it did all the way back then. There's a power to that. When you see a star named the righteous one, the desire of all nations, and then we see things mimicked in some of these phrases that are in the scriptures. And Paul is really huge on using Old Testament. In fact, next week I'll see if I can get to it. I'll print out all the uses of Paul's scripture from the Old Testament, so you can see what he uses to back, all of his ideas, his philosophies, the things that, according to him, he was taught by Jesus Christ himself. Okay? And that's why